I had a son with my first husband, and my new husband demanded that he pays rent without knowing that he owns the house we live in, so my son gave him the reverse card. I have married my now husband Joe for 15 years. I have a son, Matt, from my relationship with Jake. Right after I graduated high school, I moved into Jake's house. He passed away 3 years later from cancer. 2 years later, I met Joe, and we married a year later. Joe moved into my house, which my deceased husband owned. When my son turned 18, Joe told Matt that he had to pay $500 monthly for rent and utilities. Matt told him that he owned the house we lived in and, because he wanted to be vindictive, said Joe could pay him $1,000 monthly or get out. My husband didn't believe him, but I confirmed that this was Matt's house, and we couldn't force him to do anything. Rent didn't matter to Matt because his dad left him a fortune to cover expenses for the rest of his life. I wish Joe had talked to me about this before saying anything because we have 3 other sons. I'm a middle school teacher, and my husband works in a factory, so our combined income is only $75,000. Here, everyone has their own room, with a huge backyard and pool. We could never afford to own or rent a place like this otherwise. My husband was shocked and tried to apologize, but my son didn't accept it and insisted he had to pay or leave. The most we could afford was a 2-bedroom apartment in a bad neighborhood. I told Joe that uprooting our kids from a good school district and their friends because of his mistake wasn't an option. A month passed, and my husband still needed to pay his rent. When my son asked for it, my husband laughed and said he wasn't paying. My son gave him an eviction notice. My husband suggested we go to his parents' house, but I refused and said either he would pay or go alone. He paid and has continued to pay since then. However, my husband refuses to talk to Matt. Other than that, everything in the house is perfect. My ex also left my son a lake house in Florida. My son graduated college and wanted to take all of us on vacation to celebrate before he started law school. My husband was excited, but my son quoted him $800. He explained that a grown man shouldn't be taking a handout. Joe stormed off. This morning, the 5 of us, plus Matt's girlfriend, were headed out the door. Joe yelled at me and couldn't believe I was going. I told him I wouldn't let me and the kids suffer for a mistake he made trying to be macho. I left, and my husband sent me a text message saying he was disappointed in me for siding with my son instead of him and turning the kids against him. Am I the a-hole? I technically never married my ex. He was 50 when we had our son, so he had a good job and a few properties. I never told Joe that I didn't own the house because he would have never agreed to stay in my ex's house. So, I handled all the finances, and Joe would pay me his utilities and bills. He begged me not to divorce and said he'd just pay my son the money. I thought that was the best way to handle the situation. Also, our finances are separate, so it's not taking away from me or the kids, but Joe doesn't really have money for his hobbies and interests, which was a problem for a while until he learned to just get over it.